And most of you do know that I've been going to Iraq since 2002. I was there before the war started, and there into the war, and then a part of the Christian Peacemaker team that has been doing peace building work, accompaniment work, human rights work there. It's not a missionary group, you know, that converts, but it's a peace and human rights organization. And at first we were in Baghdad, and then in 2006 our team moved up into northern Iraq. As it became more difficult for us to work there in central Baghdad. Another issue is the bombing from Turkey in the northern border of Iraq, and as well as rockets coming over from Iran over in the northeastern border with Iran. And both of them have a little bit different roots to that issue, but both affect the people just as much. People are not a really high death rate, but there are, every so often people are killed. There are a lot of injuries, a lot of damage to property and displacement from their farms. And these are areas where people have lived for generations, for centuries, and up in the mountains, and they have orchards again. I mean, it's a really productive area for agriculture. And so we go and visit people. We hear about the bombing in a certain area, and then we go and we do some investigative work. We just talk with the people, visit them, and they share their story of what's happening. And over the years, as we've been doing this, we've written several reports that we've given to government officials, to UN officials and all, because United Nations officials that we talk to say, I can't go there, but we could take your information and we can, not that they do a lot with it, but we want to have that information, the truth of what's going on there. And that a lot of the bombing, a lot of the violence that is, Turkey says is targeting the PKK, the Kurdish, People's Party, is really targeting these villagers that live in the, these are not fighters, but they're just constantly being displaced, having their crops ruined and animals killed. And we're still monitoring the situation for displaced people within Iraq. And there are still people moving out from, the more recent area, of course, is Mosul. And you've been following that, what's been happening. And so many of those people are going westward, but still in big camps around Mosul, but some of them go eastward into the area near where we live. And there's large displacement camps. And so we periodically go and visit and listen to people, find out firsthand from them what they've gone through, what they're experiencing. And so, because we're closer to the situation, we do get a little more information and, see through a lot of the propaganda that you hear in the media here and try to be truth tellers of what's really going on. Of course, you've been hearing that now they declared victory in Mosul. But the people there, if you've read further, you've gotten other articles, it shows mass destruction. Yes. Particularly in the western half of Mosul, where people are going back and everything's destroyed, their homes are destroyed, and of course lots of people killed. I just saw an article from Amnesty International saying that they estimate 600,000 displaced in these camps around. 6,000 civilians killed by Iraqi and U.S.-led forces. They've been working together. And then thousands, they don't have a number, thousands killed by the Islamic State. And 3 million currently internally displaced. Here it says, that's all of Iraq. That's all of the Iraqis from ISIS, not just from Mosul. Like that includes the Yazidi people So in 2014, when I was there, it's right when Mosul was taken over, and we were in the large camps when the Yazidi people were coming in. There was the Sinjar Mountains. And many of them are still in the camps. Some of them they're part of a group of people that are giving alternatives to violence classes in some of these displaced camps. And so they bring together older teens and young adults from different ethnic backgrounds and bring them together for alternatives to violence class. And those have been very appreciated and successful, helping people to cope with what they're going through and to think through the issues of violence and nonviolence and what that means for their personal lives and for their society. So anyway, that's just kind of a nutshell. And when I get back, I will have a more specific stories to show, and a little more information to tell you kind of when my feet have been on the ground than now. We were up in this area in Hook where the Yazidi people were coming in, and a lot of the displacement camps are up in there. The road from Baghdad to Amman, Jordan, this is that road that we were on in March of 2003 when we had one of our cars had an accident and turned over, and we ended up, I was not in the car that turned over, but our cars had gone ahead, and we realized that car was not following us. We turned around and went back, and this is during the bombing time. This is the last day of March of 2003. So, and there were airplanes overhead, jet planes, U.S. jet planes, and we saw explosions on either side of the road as we were driving them. It was a very harrowing experience. Anyway, that was that road there, and we ended up going back and finding the men that were of our group that were in that other car, and they were in a little makeshift clinic, and Iraqi doctors and nurses were treating them. 2 would have died had they not been treated. This is during the bombing time, during the war, and just amazing the care that they gave us when we would have been seen as the enemy. Here we are, Americans traveling through and needing help. So anyway, that's that road that I'll never forget.
Didn't they go back and visit that clinic?
Yes, and I was fortunate to be able to go with the group. This was in January of 2010, where I was working on a team in Kurdistan, and I flew to Amman, because that's where the group met, and we all came in the western desert and went back to the town of Ruka and found 3 of the medical people that helped us save the lives of our group members, and had a wonderful visit there, and were able to thank people and see what it was like after 7 years.
Peggy,
Yeah.
can you point out, I know you were taken by someone.
I was taken.
Where was that?
That was, we were in the north. So we were on a trip over to this area, and we're told that was a place we could travel safely. But on our way back, it was up in this area, 2 of our team, another team member and I were kidnapped, and fortunately I was released after 2 days, 2 nights. And my companion was kept another 6 days, but fortunately he was released unharmed. So we're very thankful that turned out all right. But that was up in this area when we were traveling to a very impoverished part of Iraq. And we were...
What did they want by kidnapping you? What was their demands?
Well, we don't know for sure. This is the best we can guess, is that this was a entry-level, I don't know if that's my words, entry-level kidnapping group. In other words, they weren't harming us, but they were kidnapping people then they would sell people to the hardcore and make money. And then the hardcore would try to get money out of you. It would be, that's what we think, that it has to do with them just trying to extort money from people, from foreigners. Okay, I'm going to go on a little bit here, and then we can come back if you have any other questions about Iraq or Nigeria. Many of you know that 2 years ago, that's in 2015, I spent 3 months in Nigeria. And I was there with a church group. The group is a Church of the Brethren. And the reason they're working there, the Church of the Brethren here in the United States, is that the majority of the people affected by Boko Haram are from this church group in Nigeria. They're now an independent church of Nigeria, but it was started by Church of the Brethren here, so that's the connection. And so when the people began, like Boko Haram just ravished, went through these villages, killing people by hundreds of thousands, and displacing people, the Church of the Brethren in the United States, even though they weren't connected technically anymore, they decided to come over and just help them deal with that and help them with healing kinds of programs and rebuilding kinds of programs. So when I heard about that, it seemed good to be able to go there and be of help to the people there. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, I mean, over 10,000 people killed. So we're talking not just about a few hundred or whatever. 10,000 people by Boko Haram in that region. And just of that Nigerian church group. But it's also Muslim people there too. So I don't want to make it sound like it was just Christians that were killed. Muslims in those villages who didn't cooperate with Boko Haram were also killed and displaced, had their homes destroyed. Anyone who didn't cooperate. Okay. But 700,000 people displaced from their villages by it. And 150 beyond that went over the border into the Cameroons.
Where were the schoolgirls kidnapped?
Okay, they were from Chibok, which is somewhere really close here. I'm trying to find it here. It's in this province. I won't take time to find it, but it's really close to Maiduguri. And I just heard a week ago, because you probably heard that many of the girls were released recently, about a month ago. And I assumed that they had gone back to their families. But what I heard from, this came through the Nigerian leaders that I'm in contact with, they said that the ones just recently released are still in government custody, and they have not been allowed to go back to their homes. And they don't know for sure, but we can only guess that it has to do with trying to get more information from them before they release them, like interrogation. Okay, so anyway, but as many of you probably have heard, there's still tremendous need there for problems. It's one of the areas that international people are saying there's famine going on. Because wherever people were displaced and their villages were ravaged, their crops, their stores of food were all taken. And their houses destroyed. So when they go back, they have to start over. They have to rebuild a house. They start over with, almost every family has a little plot where they raise a lot of their own food. And so they have to start over. And the season for planting is in March and April, and then they reap it in October, November is the harvest, after their summer rainy season. So many of the people going back have nothing, and they need food aid. And so one of the programs that, the program I will be with, one of the things they do is food and supply distribution to the people who have gone back, and also to people in into the IDP camps. Because even the international groups giving food to the IDP camps isn't enough. And it keeps them from starving, but they're still malnourished. They don't get enough food, even from the aid agencies. So economic help is part of it. Food distribution, livelihood workshops, training to give skills and for cottage industries for people to make a living. And a lot of the people that come to those trainings are widows whose husband's been killed by Boko Haram, or older children who are taking care of their younger siblings because their parents were killed. Those are the kind of people that come, and they teach them sewing and making soap products. And then at the end of a 6-month training, they give them a sewing machine, or they give them a knitting machine, or a corn grinder to do corn grinding for their neighbors and to get a little money, but so that they can become self-sufficient. Another program, there's a lot of agricultural programs to help with new methods, simple methods of agriculture for people to be able to get a better crop. Just in the last 2 months, they bought over there 2 new tractors for a soybean project. And they're helping people in 2 areas to raise soybeans, which is new to that area. That's not a traditional crop. And once they get a crop, instead of having to compete with each other on the market, they have a co-op and a place to store it so that they can sell it when the price is a good price and they're not competing with each other, they're cooperating. And the tractor then is used for people from the whole area. That is one of the new programs that I found fascinating. There's educational programs for the children who are displaced, who haven't been in school now for 2 or 3 years, and trying to get them back into school. And then there's trauma healing workshops. When I was there 2 years ago, I was able to be a part of several of those and found them very well done. I mean, as far as the kind of understanding of the needs of people having gone through that. And people would come together and share about what they've gone through and really understand that the effects of it, and that it's natural to have all those feelings, and then to be able to talk with each other about what they've gone through and to be able to help to work that out and in a group setting. And then, but all the leadership for that is from the Nigerian people themselves. They've been taken, some of them went to Rwanda and were trained by the Great Lakes Friends group over there. And then they came back and trained others, and so it's just spreading out to beyond the initial trainers, and it's going on. And then there's reconciliation work between Muslims and Christians. And when I was there 2 years ago, I was hearing stories of, I was hearing a lot of anger and mistrust from Christians of their Muslim neighbors for what they had gone through. But I also heard a lot of stories where in a mixed community where the Muslims hid the Christians or helped them escape or were killed because they wouldn't cooperate. I mean, a real togetherness and a refusal to go along with the attempt to divide the people there. And so there are people there that feel very weak and they don't feel like they can do that work, but there are others who really have a passion for reconciliation in that, and a vision of it. And so they have started organizations in different areas of Muslims and Christians that come together and work with the youth and work on a local level to try to dispel the increased hostility. one of the projects that was started 2 years ago, and I'm going to be eager to see the completion of it now. It's not complete, you know, it's going to keep growing, I think. But it's the Gurkha Interfaith Camp, it was called. It's really a village that was built from scratch in the Abuja area, and they brought half Christians, half Muslim families together there. And the people helped to build their own houses. I mean, they all worked together. It's not like they just built their own house, but they built the community houses together. And now they have plots of farmlands around it, and they've started a school and a clinic, and have a little mosque there, and have a little church there. And the people are living very respectfully and caringly together. And they want to be a model to others in their society that Muslims and Christians can live together peacefully. You know that that's been something in my work that one of the things I look for is that kind of cooperation for people who have the vision beyond their own group and are caring for others. Those are the stories that I get really attracted to. And I'm hoping, in fact, I was told that we would go and be able to spend some time in the Gurkha camp and see how much it's grown and how it's going. So hopefully I'll be able to report on that when I come back. Okay, that just sort of covers the type of work we're going to be in. I'll be with a group of people this time, like a delegation type, for about a little over 3 weeks. So it's not as much time as I had before, so I'll be a little more limited in my experiences, but having had that experience and knowing some people there, it will be easier for me to, I think, just to kind of follow up on the things that I've learned or things that I've seen and know the right questions to ask and things like that. Okay, questions?
What about the language issues there in Nigeria?
Yeah, because Nigeria was a British colony, people going to school learn English, you know, children do, but they come from their tribal, so every child, before they go to school, they're speaking their tribal language. Then they get to school, they learn English, and they may learn 2 or 3 other tribal languages, the nearby tribes. So they're very multilingual. But sometimes the accent of the Nigerian people, even speaking English, sometimes is difficult to understand. So sometimes it's, you know, have to repeat or have somebody help, even if they're speaking English, because they haven't necessarily heard how we pronounce words, and our language isn't always phonetically pronounced, you know, the way it is. So it's a difficult language for them to learn. And so when I'm there, I learn readings in a couple languages so that I can greet people. In Hausa, Hausa is the main area language, and then you have all the smaller tribal languages that people speak. It does make it easier, though, that they are learning English, and that it's easier to, a little more common ground on that, on language-wise. Yeah.
Can we go back to Iraq?
Okay.
I wanted to ask about the referendum coming up in September on Kurdish independence.
But yeah.
On Kurdish independence. Where do you think that's going, and how would that impact your work in the future, should that transpire?
Those are 2 good questions.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. There's a referendum coming up in September for the Kurdish region, and they're going to vote whether they want to be separate or an autonomous region. And that was when the Iraqi constitution was put together back in 2004. One of the stipulations in that, as they came together and agreed on it, was that by 2007, the Kurdish people were supposed to be able to vote for that. But then the central Iraqi government in Baghdad refused to let them have that referendum way back then, in 2007. So this is finally coming up to where they can do it. And one of the main reasons they haven't been able to suppress this is that the Kurdish militias have been very successful in fighting ISIS and have gotten more support from the United States. And so it really is coming out of the role that they played in the battle with ISIS. They've been more successful than the Iraqi troops, all that anyway. And the Kurdish people groups in Syria have also been more successful against ISIS, the YGP. Anyway, that's how it has come out. And so if it is passed, it gives them a legitimate standing in order to be there, like, and I don't know for sure. One of the things I'm not sure about, because I didn't read, very detailed reports about it. I've only gotten articles that have been a little more surface, but I'm not sure, but I'm expecting that they're still a connection with the central government. And that's the piece I'm not completely clear about, is how that line is going to be as far as authority between the Kurds and the Iraqi government. That's the piece I don't know. But I am expecting that even if it passes, that there's been so much animosity between the two governments that I'm expecting there still not to be an easy road, or that the Iraqi government will not allow them to be as completely independent and find ways to sabotage it. That's what the Kurds are expecting. But they still want to try, and they want to push this forward. Now, as far as our work, if it is accepted, then we will have less accessibility to the rest of Iraq. In other words, it will make it harder for us to travel outside of that, out of our region. Right now, we're getting visas from the Kurdish people. We have to, if we want to, like, say, visit around outside the Kurdish region, if we want to go to the Mosul area, for example, we have to go through checkpoints to get into the Nineveh province, which is where Mosul is. And we have to show some kind of invitation letters or have a reason for going there. We have to justify that, and they have to accept us to let us in. So it just makes traveling a little trickier. But if we go from our area to Baghdad, we have to have invitations from organizations or government officials there and get another, like, short visa just to go into Baghdad. I mean, it complicates things, in other words. Yeah.
My question is, okay, the reason that the central government doesn't want the Kurdish people to be independent, that has to be because of oil, right?
It has a lot to do with oil, yeah. I mean, there's oil reserves in the south, so it's not like all the oil, but there's significant oil fields up in the north. And of course, the city of Kirkuk is technically outside of what's now considered the Kurdish, but it's mainly Kurds there. And the plan is that in this vote, that they will go to add that to the Kurdish region. That's a part of that vote, is to add these parts that are mostly Kurdish but then got left out of the KRG-controlled government area. So that's the prize area is Kirkuk, really large. But there's even large oil reserves in the Kurdish, what's considered the KRG area right now. I mean, there's also untapped reserves up there that are hoping to, be able to support themselves as a Kurdish region from the oil. Yeah.
That is sort of my question also is, well, number one, why do they want to be separated from Iraq? And Is it because then they want to have autonomy and be able to, flow out the oil and gas company?
Yeah, that's, why do they want to be separate? And it's partly economic, but it has some other historical roots. And one is that back in the 80s, 1980s, under Saddam, that's when Saddam was in power, there was what they call a genocide against the Kurds. And so the Iraqi troops under Saddam went up into that area and forced a lot of the people to relocate to the south so that that Arab families could move up there. And that had a lot to do with the oil. And that's so that they could be in control of the oil region, but thousands of Iraqi Kurds were killed in that. And that's when many of you probably heard about the city of Halabja that was gassed. It is very close to the Iranian border. It's not very far from where we live there in Sulaymaniyah, Halabja. And so they were like poison gas bombing and just thousands just decimated in that area from it. So there's this very emotional, it's once something like that happens, a genocide, a horrible, and a displacement of people like that forced, it takes, it's many generations of pain, of trauma still left over from that. So there's a lot of the Kurd, and then during those years, Saddam forbade them to use the Kurdish language. And they had to use Arabic in their schools. So there's a whole generations that grew up knowing Arabic, but the newer generation just speaks Kurdish. So some of it has to do with ethnic identity, being able to have maintain that ethnic identity. And then Saddam and his forces, the Kurdish region is in a more mountainous area and beautiful places over the mountain with waterfalls and lakes, and and during the time of Saddam, the most beautiful spots were taken by Saddam and his forces for them to use. And the Kurdish people, local people, were not allowed to go in those areas and have vacations there anymore. But once they were released from Saddam and the fall of Saddam, they were able to reclaim those. So there's just a lot of history that goes into understanding why they want to be separate. Many of them say, we want to protect ourselves for the future. What if the new government decides to do what Saddam did? And they see the new government in Baghdad as men taking power there who are not real sympathetic toward the Kurds. And they never know if another dictator will rise and they will again be in danger. So it's like, we want to protect our future, our children's. Those are reasons. Yeah. Lois and then
I have the impression that there are Kurds divided up into a number of different countries.
Yes.
Kurdish Turks, Kurds in Iran, Kurds
Yes.
in the Caucasus, part of Russia, and so on. And that this is kind of odd, this is a sort of a large ethnic area, which some people, they think, want to become a separate country.
Yes.
And what about that?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another piece of the history that I didn't really cover well. And that's because at the end of World War I, when that area was still, the Ottoman Empire controlled that region, that whole area, and then they were defeated. And so at that time, the Kurdish people helped the British forces, to defeat the Ottoman Empire. But the agreement was if they helped, then they would be given their own country. And so they were sure that at the end of that war, they would have, Kurdistan would be developed, and it was promised. But then there were still some battles that the Ottoman Empire, there were certain pockets where they had not yet been defeated. And they were still struggling and still fighting. And the British wanted to get it over quickly, and the Ottoman Empire, they said, we will surrender on condition that you not develop a Kurdistan. And we could keep that area as part of Turkey. When they redrew the map that's when the country of Iraq was carved out, and they defined the borders between Iraq and Syria and Iran. All that was created, defined. And so they felt like they were cheated by not having their own country. So the Kurds were divided up among Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey. And then, like you said, some of them were in the Caucasus, but the majority are in those particular countries. And so part of their longing is eventually to have their own country. And the whole issue with PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, had to do with groups of people after the First World War who wanted, it was a liberation group, to try to regain an area in Turkey that would be Kurdish. That was the whole goal of it. And they did it militarily, and it was all a war that got started between them. But it was a liberation movement to try to carve out an area of Turkey for the Kurds. And of course, they have not been successful, but there's an ongoing struggle between Turkey and the Kurds because of that. And it still continues. Even though most of the Kurds now, if you talk to them, they'll say, we've kind of accepted the fact that we don't have our own government, but we just want at least to have at least a semi-autonomous region. Many of them would just be satisfied with that, like the northern Iraq has. People in Turkey and Syria would like that. Now there's a recent development that when the Syrian Kurdish militias were successful in pushing ISIS out of an area, I don't have a map, an area of northern Syria, northeastern Syria, actually real near the Turkish border. They pushed ISIS out of a large area and maintained control of it, the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds. And so they are building and developing what they call an egalitarian society, a society that they control. And they want it to be for equal rights for people from all backgrounds. They don't say, they're not just wanting it to be just Kurdish, but they welcome Christians and Muslims and Arab and Kurds, and they want them to, all the peoples to come and live together peacefully in their differences and respectfully. And it would be, and women would have equal rights. I mean, it's something more progressive as far as the political bent and the way that they would, more democratically run by all the people, things like that. So it's a very interesting vision, and they're still there, and they still have that area, and I don't know if later they're going to be overrun and that's going to be squashed. I don't know, but that's a real exciting thing for the Kurds in northern Iraq that I talked to, and when I was there last summer, they were talking about that. That's when I first heard about it. They call it Rojava. You don't hear a lot about that in the news here.
There was a really good movie at the Cleveland Film Festival.
Oh.
Yeah, I'll have to find the name for it.
Yeah. Just Rojava is the name of it, but it's a really interesting experiment. And,
And it was mostly women fighters that were the ones that took over.
So
Back the city.
Yeah, women's fighters, and they're very well respected in it. And the PKK and those other Kurds. I mean, my difference with them is that I prefer non-violence, okay? But they are, other than that, they're different. I mean, they're very egalitarian as far as women and men and democratic and more of a socialist type of a society. And And a lot of women join that because they want that. You know, they want to get out of the patriarchal situation and have a life, even if it means a fighter. Being a fighter, they believe that that's going to lead to a better society for women. And they're trying to make that possible. That's there. Yeah, Jonathan first, and we'll get back to it.
Okay, you kind of covered the point I was going to make. I was going to suggest, like you, I think the Iraqi central government will resist the Kurdish autonomy probably to a high degree. And I think somehow Turkey is also going to be very strongly against that as well, because that's exactly what Turkey is most concerned about. Is the Kurdish people having their own country, their own homeland, because the largest chunk, as you alluded to, would probably be from Turkey. That's where they probably would expect to have the biggest piece of that Kurdistan would be Turkey. So
yeah, that's very threatening to Turkey, right? And see, there was a ceasefire for 3 years between Turkey and the PKK, and it was moving in that direction of you know, dissolving that whole conflict. And then when the Kurds began to be successful against Islamic State, then that got really threatening. And then when the Kurds were successful up there in northern Syria, they were talking about this Rojava experiment. They started bombing again in northern Iraq. Now it's happening again. So it's part of their trying to suppress the Kurdish movement. That's really what the bombing is about. Because the PKK really isn't doing that much damage to their country or whatever, but it's really about trying to keep the Kurds from gaining enough power or something so they can become their own part of Turkey and want to secede from Turkey. That's the real reason the main reason. I don't mean, obviously that's probably a little simplified, but that's the main reason.
And that was part of the strategy of the British, you know, when they divided up countries, divide them up so that there were, you'd have different groups, ethnic groups like the Kurds in different countries. That's a way to keep a country from being united. And for the Brits and for the United States too, for colonial powers, divide and conquer, of course, is the oldest strategy in Britain. If you can have, you know, these countries divided into ethnic, you know, warring ethnic groups, that means they can be controlled from the outside initially, if they're not united internally.
Yeah, that's an old trick of those in power. The U.S. does that all over, and other people in power too. Saddam certainly did that among the Iraqi people because he was from the Sunni Muslims, and they were in the minority. But because of the kind of power and trying to divide people was part of the strategy, and it worked for many years. Great.
So, yeah, like Jonathan's question and your answers to sort of answered a lot of it. But it seems like bombings from both Iran and Turkey are mainly just kind of terrorism on the Kurdish people there rather than targeting military.
Yeah. Right. When we visited last year, I was there for a month in northern Iraq. And then I went from there to Lesbos, Greece, and I was there for a month, for a little 6 weeks in Lesbos. So that last summer, I was also in Iraq. And at that time, let's see, what was your, sorry, lose my train. Yeah.
The bombing.
Oh yeah, the bombing.
Yeah.
We visited areas along the Iranian border, and where they were being, like, it isn't from planes, it's from rockets over the border from Iran. But with Turkey, it's actual planes dropping bombs, so it's a little different. But in those areas along the Iranian border, they are the areas we visited where they had just had a lot of bombing and displacement. And we visited a village that they had sent over incendiary, you say it? Yeah, and they burned like this whole village, just areas been burned like over a period of a week. We were there and saw a lot of damage, and then later after we left, we got a call from one of the men we talked to there and said they burned even more, and everybody had to leave that village. But it's partly because they're Kurds, but it's also because there's a rebel group called see if to make sure I get that right, it's called the Democratic Party of Iran, It's KDI. And it's a rebel group that wants to have a revolution against the Iranian government. And it's been around for years, for a long time. And so the rockets are trying to target these groups, and they kind of travel around. They don't have permanent bases. And so what they do is they travel through these villages, and then say they're in that region, or if they just left that region, then Iran will send rockets there, and their excuse is, well, you cooperated with them. And yet these people have no choice. And these fighters come in and they just take over. I mean, it's, in fact, when we were going to that village, there was a checkpoint with that group, fighters, that didn't want us to go in there, but we were eventually, our translators and guide talked them down, and we were able to get through their checkpoint to go to that village and see what was going on. But they were definitely in that area when we were there, but they weren't dangerous to us. That group that was inside Iraq, they are mostly wanting to be revolutionary to what's going on in Iran. That's their main target. They're not, opposing us being there. Yeah, Linda.
Back to Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you know, I mean, you just said it's the latest group of returned young women
Yeah.
that has not been allowed to return to their families. You're not saying all the women that have been returned in the last year or so are still in government?
Right. I'm only talking about the recent, like in the last 2 months, there was a large group that were
So
returned.
what do we know, because some of these women returned with children.
Yes.
What do we know about how that's going in terms of coming home?
Well, what I'm hoping to find out more. It's a little sketchy because we don't hear a lot. But what I do know is that most of the families had villages where they went back were very accepting and helpful. But there were a few that refused to accept their women back. And that's probably what we would hear in the news. There were articles about that. That was the minority. But there were those that were refused, and their children were considered Boko Haram children, so they were rejected, and those girls end up having to go somewhere else where people would accept them. And even their own family wouldn't. So that did happen. But the majority of them, their families and their communities, were helping. And then the Nigerian church there that have these programs, they have the trauma healing also, then that they'll have special ones just for those girls. And they had special ones for widows whose husband has been killed and they watch the killing. So that they have specialized groups that meet together. And I met several women who told me very brutal stories. I mean, of being woken up in the middle of the night and seeing their husband throat slit and, and their children killed right in front of them. And then this one woman, they came toward her with a knife. She put her arm up and they slashed her arm, and then her throat, but she survived. And the neighbors found her, rushed her to the hospital. She's had at least maybe 15 surgeries since then, but she's alive and a beautiful woman and is dealing with it. She's still dealing with the trauma, but then she and other widows like that, like her, who witnessed the death of family members, had special trauma groups. And they still are meeting and support, and people are helping them with that. Go into depression or illnesses, others just tremendous anger, and they're almost afraid of themselves, that they're going to do something, or other family members or friends try to. And so when they have the trauma healing, workshops, it starts out, I mean, they start by just sharing that these are just normal, natural responses, all of these different possibilities to trauma, and that they shouldn't feel different or, something guilty or whatever for having those feelings. And it really makes a difference for them to acknowledge and accept what's going on within them. That's the first step. It starts there, and then they start to share, and it does. And many of them walk out there and say, I was dysfunctional, or I was so angry I was going to hurt other people, or I was beating my wife, and now I understand that's normal. I mean, normal to have those feelings. And now, and I have brothers and sisters who understand that and are going to help me in this process. It's not a really quick process. It's something, but it's starting them on that journey, and then with other people around them that also went through the workshop in their region, so they can help each other. It's a really good program.
When you talk about the things that are being done in Nigeria by the Nigerian people and these wonderful programs, how much of the population that needs that help do you think is it a large number of folks who are involved in these kinds of...
I don't have like an actual figure percentage, but it would be somewhere between 30 and 50%. They say at least 30% have more severe trauma. And then they say there's others that have, like maybe it's more quiet within them, and they don't, they're not functioning well, but they're not as overtly understanding what's going on. So that goes up to like 50% that have been still dealing with trauma.
And then you were mentioning some of the other programs, like the economic, the training. Would that be the same kind of percentage of folks who are...
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It was, I think they said that, I don't remember the percentages here. I think it was like 70% of their church members of that group were killed. I mean, we're talking about a devastation. I mean, it's like,
Are we talking about 30 to 50% in the entire country?
In the
or
entire, right.
Or in that section where...
in that section. But see, then there were some other places where Boko Haram fighters, once they were being countered and the Nigerian army were trying to contain them or whatever, there were fighters that went underground, and then they went to other cities and did suicide bombings. So there have been other places where there's been some, but the majority of it is in that northeastern area, I pointed out. And that's where the villages and the houses were destroyed by the actual group. And when we were driving back then, we were driving toward one of those cities, towns where there was a lot of destruction, and we were driving along the road. We were seeing along the road burnt and destroyed houses and villages as we were driving, and there was a mosque that had been destroyed and burnt, and we were told that it was because they hid Christians there, tried to protect them. So Boko Haram destroyed the mosque. And there was a lot of that kind of helping each other out. Here I am, a white Westerner, going there, and they still see us as superior. I mean, that's maybe the hardest thing I have to deal with in Nigeria, is that deference. And I wish we could just be equal, but there's this hesitation to see, they feel inferior just because of that. And that isn't going to go away suddenly, it's going to take maybe generations, I don't know. And partly because that's perpetuated by the difference between rich and poor, corrupt and poor, in your society. It's, not as much racially now, but it's but that those feelings are still there, and that sense of their identity is still there. I mean, it's passed on. So that's hard. In Iraq, when we went there before the war, we were meeting with people. They were really glad to have us there. We were trying to speak out against war. We were speaking out against war, and so people were very happy. They didn't want war, and we were well accepted. We were confined by the government. We had to be real careful where, you know, what we said. We couldn't criticize Saddam, and there were all those restrictions. And we had, if we traveled outside of Baghdad, we had to go with a government official, go with us, and things like that. So, but still, while we're in Baghdad, we could walk freely and talk to anyone on the street, so we had a lot of freedom while we were there. After the invasion, then as things became more, they realized the U.S. was not planning to leave, and as people began to be treated more brutally in the different cities like Fallujah and other places where, I mean, when they began to see what occupation was like and the violence of the U.S. occupying troops in their communities, then it shifted and more anger toward Americans. And so by 2006, you know, we had to be more careful on the streets. And so the women, we began to dress like Iraqi women so that if we were walking on the street, somebody driving by wouldn't know immediately. People in our neighborhood knew who we were, and they could tell. And we were safe in our neighborhood, but people driving by could just start shooting at an international person not knowing who they were. So we had to deal with that hatred now building up toward the U.S. But we were still invited into areas, like a whole village or community that had been raided by U.S. forces and a lot of people killed or imprisoned. They invited us in, and we were very safe among them. And of course, we always traveled without weapons and without armed guards, and so we were seen as less threatening. We could go, and we began to build a reputation of being there actually to help the people. So that made a big difference. And so we would go mostly in these areas by invitation and with local people, and that made a big difference. Like when we went into Fallujah, 3 months after it was devastated, destroyed by U.S. forces, it was destroyed in November 2004. We went there in early March of 2005, and it was not many international people had gone in to see the devastation at that time. But we were invited by local people in Fallujah, and it was still dangerous to go in, but much safer because they took us around and they saw us as being there to help. And they protected us while we were there in this way. And then moving up to the north, it took a couple years to really get to know people, build up a reputation, and among individuals and organizations. It took a while to get to that place, but now people know who we are, organizations call on us for help, and in the Kurdish region, we're not particularly locally, we're not in particular danger. I mean, only if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, a suicide bombing, or it's not real frequent in that region. Yeah. So right now, I feel really good about the where the team is as far as having found our way in there and are very well accepted and appreciated among the local people and the human rights workers and organizations.
So it is 8 o'clock, and I know we all have many questions for Peggy, but I do want to honor her time and honor everyone's time here. And just thank you, Peggy, for doing the work that you do, inspiring so many, and sharing your story and your journey with us. So if you all can give Peggy a hand.